This episode of NSCTV is brought to you by Leonora AAA, Bushrangers Brotherhood, Gilba Project Management, Geelong Firearm Courses, Hunters and Shooters Society of Australia, Ballarat Arms and Military Collectors Society, the Combined Firearms Council of South Australia, Auto Scratch, and Kilsyth Outdoor Store. Welcome to another episode of NSCTV, and thank you to our patient supporters and our sponsors for making this possible. You may have heard about Kate Fantinel, Lady Liberty. In this episode, we catch up with Kate to talk about how she got involved in shooting, how she got involved in politics, and what she thinks about the current state of affairs. Stay with us. So I've got Kate Fantinel from Western Australia here. How are you doing, Kate?
Good. How are you, Neil?
Good. I'm fine, thank you. And look, thanks very much for coming on NSCTV. Really appreciate you doing that. Under the banner of Lady Liberty, which I think perhaps is a bit of a description of your journey in politics so far.
Yes, give me liberty or give me death is the saying that I embrace. So Kate Fantinel is my real name, but Lady Liberty is what I'm known for mostly online in my Twitter and social media profiles.
Which I think reflects your journey. As I said, it's not just a brand, it actually is a journey. And I suspect it'll be a journey for quite a few more years to come, which is excellent. Now, you were telling me just before, you actually took up shooting, or you got involved in shooting at a very young age in South Australia. You just want to quickly recap how you got involved and hooked.
Yeah, so I'm originally from a small town 3 hours north of Adelaide in South Australia. So I spent my weekends on the farm with my dad holding the spotlight originally, popping bunnies and foxes. And he taught me basic firearms training. He taught all three of his kids basic firearms training, which I'm extremely grateful for. And the interest, if you ever came across a firearm, we would know what to do with it to be safe. And then as I got older, I visited a number of ranges and fell into pistol shooting. I found that was the most exhilarating sport of choice and discipline of choice for me. So I joined a pistol club in Adelaide called Club 21 that used to shoot at Marksman, and won a few club championships, nothing too crazy. But I was on the cover of a magazine for it, so that was nice. And then, I've just always been passionate about supporting law-abiding firearm owners. I'm old enough to just remember 1996 when my dad had to give back some of his guns, even though he didn't do anything wrong. So I think that how he was treated at the time has really stayed with me. And that's why I have this passion to stand up for people and shooters who haven't done anything wrong, but are treated constantly like criminals by the government. So that's how I got here.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's about how shooters were treated at the time. I don't think anybody had a problem with, whatever it took to make sure that guns stayed in the right hands. But to be treated the way we were, it was very offensive, and I think that's why it's stuck with a lot of people. I was included for such a long time. You were telling me also you've been to the States a few times and you had a little bit of fun there a while ago. What were you firing?
I've been to the United States of America about 4 times now. I was lucky to go across when I was working for the Sporting Shooters Association of Australia, SSAA, and went to the NRA and had a tour of the museum there, including the vaults underneath where they had some guns, including the Say Hello to My Little Friend gun. I got to hold that. There's a picture of me holding that out there on the internet. But every time I go to the States, I make sure I go to a gun range and just try everything I can. Been to Vegas quite a few times, shot, AK-47, Israeli machine guns, anything that they'll let me shoot, that we should be able to shoot for the record. I go and have a go.
Definitely recommended. Now, you mentioned the SSAA. You actually worked for them for a few years. In what capacity?
So I worked for SSAA in the national office, which is based in Adelaide and has an office in Canberra. I was originally hired as the media advisor, and then lobbied for the reinstatement of the SSAA Legislative Action Department, which is the political arm based on the NRA's Institute of Legislative Action, just to differentiate between the activities of the SSAA as an organisation that hosts shooting competitions, and also the political aspect of it, because unfortunately we need to stand, we don't want to be going into Canberra and talking about, this is what we want for our sport, but we are always in the firing line, if you will, whenever a shooting occurs. So we needed to have that presence. And I found myself quite politically minded and ended up falling into the lobbying path, which is how I met former Senator David Leyonhjelm.
Before we get on to that, I have trouble sometimes saying this, SSAA Legislative Action Group is interesting because obviously it was modelled, at least in name, on the NRA ILA, Institute of Legislative Action, I think it's called. And I'm just looking at basically a statement that put it by SSAA National in 2016, where it says, SSAA National will be launching a new communications platform, SSAA Legislative Action, or SSAA. Members may be familiar with the NRA's Institute of Legislative Action body that is the lobbying arm of the association. The SSAA will be similar in the sense that it will act as our political voice and clearly outline our political activities to our members. And I'm sorry, I don't seem to see a lot of the lobbying action that's come from that. What I am seeing is, if you go to the SSAA National website, there are news stories that have been put out with the SSAA banner, but not about their political lobbying. I find that a bit disappointing, given the narrative that they set.
Yeah, so I haven't worked for SSAA since 2018, so I haven't been around since then. But one of my frustrations, and I guess it's a criticism, is that some of the things that we lobby for, we don't publicise, and there's a number of reasons for that. Another frustration I had is the bit of conservative approach to lobbying. So it was seen as more as, let's go down the educational route first and try and educate politicians about firearms and what we use them for and how we're not the bad guys. So I'm quite a passionate out there person. Just by looking at me, you could probably see that. So it was hard for me to just hold the tide, was basically the aim of SSAA, Institute of Legislative Action at the time. Whether that's a right or wrong approach, I don't know. I personally have views where I want to see the NFA, the powers given back to the states to legislate firearm laws entirely. I don't think there should be a document at a federal level. I believe in decentralisation as a classical liberal, but that doesn't align with what SSAA believe in. So,
yeah, it's. You're right. I think if education was the panacea, if that was the solution to our problem, that would make our job a lot easier. But I think the evidence shows that it hasn't, which is disappointing. So, my view, not always shared by others, is politics is a blood sport. It's a tough game, and you've got to take prisoners sometimes. Take prisoners, as the case may be. So, okay, so you worked with SSAA until 2018. Do you want to share why?
Well, while I was lobbying in Canberra, I met former Senator David Leyonhjelm, who's the first Liberal Democrat senator and politician ever elected in Australia. So the Lib Dems, classical Liberal Libertarian Party, formed in 2001, and we just hit it off right from the start. He's a shooter, pistol shooter like me, and I just went in there and I found I could speak quite frankly to him about what I was thinking about where we should go with Australia's gun laws in. And then he just called me up one day and said, will you come and work for me? And that's when I left SSAA.
Yeah, there'd be a reason why I called you, and that would be because of your approach. And one of the questions I asked you, which you kind of answered prior to the interview, is I asked, how did you find working under David? And I'll read out your response. He's the best boss I ever had.
Yes.
Tell us about it.
Yeah. So I think I remember the first meeting I had with him, and we started talking about Howard's gun laws, and I kind of said, "Oh, well, this is what I believe." And then I said to him, quite frankly, "Do you think we can only make this change once John Howard dies?" And he just lost it and laughed, and he's like, "You're my kind of person." But I found him very respectful. He mentored me. He's taught me a lot about politics and libertarianism. A lot of people have only learnt about this philosophy through him. It's a lot bigger in America. And I found him hard worker because, we're paid for by the taxpayer. So long hours, very disciplined. And I owe where I am today because of Senator Leyonhjelm taking me under his wing. So
yeah, personally, I think if we need Dave, we need people like David. We really need him because we're dead without him, unfortunately. Now, you then obviously David lost his seat in 20. What year was it? It was this last federal election.
So he tried to switch from the Senate to New South Wales upper house because the two major parties combined to make the Senate quota harder for minor parties to get elected, which is why you've seen at the last election a smaller crossbench, and we warned about that at the time, but no one was listening. So he tried to switch to New South Wales Parliament in 2019. He came 23rd out of 21 seats, so we narrowly missed out. And then we've obviously got the New South Wales state election in March. So hopefully if the Lib Dems can pull it together, they might get one in, but time will tell.
Then you moved back to People's Republic of Western Australia.
Yeah, so Aaron Stonehouse was the representative for the Lib Dems over here at the time in the upper house, and he offered me a job because he'd seen what I did for Leyonhjelm and came across here. So I've moved. I've just got back from Melbourne, actually, so I helped out with the Lib Dems in the Victorian state election campaign. So I've moved around the country 3 times for this party. I'm not sure how much I've achieved for them, but it's the passion that I bring that I hope people will at least recognise.
I actually also asked you a question, one of the other questions I asked you, which I don't know the answer to. I'm really curious, is whether you had met Paul. I'm not sure if the pronunciation right, Papalia or Papalia, because I've heard 2 different versions.
Yeah, I've heard 2 different versions too. So I call him Papalia, but
Papalia, yes.
Yeah.
I've heard locals refer to him. So maybe that's the correct pronunciation. And your answer was no, but I did go to his office during the Senate campaign, which you're happy to talk about. So what happened?
So back in March last year, I'd been endorsed to be the lead Senate candidate for the Liberal Democrats for Western Australia at the 2022 federal election. Not by choice. I didn't want to be the candidate, but I was the best person at the time. So I took, I stepped up to the challenge. And prior to that, Paul Papalia had released the addresses of licensed firearm owners to the media here, the West Australian newspaper, and they published it on the front page, and you could actually reverse engineer it to see the locations of where registered firearms and law-abiding firearm owners live. Now, that just goes to show the state of affairs in Western Australia. If a police minister who's been banging on about public safety under the guise of COVID for 2.5 years then goes around and exposes the locations of legally owned firearms using the media here, who is just a puppet for McGowan, I was horrified. And since then, I had people contact me saying their homes had been broken into because criminals had access. It was a shopping list for criminals on the front page of the state's newspaper. I was horrified. So as part of my Senate campaign, I ran a Give Shooters a Fair Go campaign. I know it was convoluting state and federal issues. I knew that, but we don't have an opposition here in Western Australia. There's 2 Liberals in the lower house and a handful in the upper house. The Nationals actually hold more seats. So there was no one standing up for shooters. And I thought, I'm going to use this as someone has to say something. So I put my face on call flutes or election banners, and I had me shooting a 303 and my little 22 Browning Buckmark, and I just said, give gun owners a fair go. That was my message. I went to the police minister's office to give him one of my call flutes, and they were going to call the police on me. So I had to get out of there pretty quick. And I managed to put one in the ground outside his office so he could see it when he left work that day. But it just goes to show that he didn't want to have the conversation. And yes, people had tried to contact him, but he was just being that disrespectful that,
This is the man who was holding a jaw blaster at a media conference, a real He-Man sort of pose.
Yes.
And, it was quite unfortunate, which we've used, I guess, quite a few times in our material.
It's just not, it just wasn't respectful. And interestingly enough, WA is the only state that doesn't have state-based privacy legislation, and the national privacy laws don't cover this.
So, Kate, thank you so much for that. And how can people read about you, find out about you? What's the best mechanism for that?
Well, I'm quite a prolific user of Twitter and Facebook. I'm known for my memes. So Kate Fantinel Lady Liberty on Facebook, or Lady Liberty WAUS on Twitter is my handle. I'm also on Instagram as Lady Liberty Australia, and I have a website, ladyliberty.com.au. I'm selling 2023 state of emergency calendars at the moment. So I've got quite a few pictures with guns in them, just with, key dates when we close the border, that kind of thing, just so people don't forget what the government did to us. But yeah, if you want to follow me, that'd be appreciated.
Fair, no worries. Okay, Kate, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of NSCTV, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel here and tell your friends about it so they can do the same. So see you later.